In 1943, a black woman stood outside Birmingham General Hospital holding the lifeless body of a white child she had tried desperately to save. The child had died not from his injuries, but because the hospital refused to let her through the door. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Grace Carter, and she was about to become the most hated woman in Alabama for a crime she never committed, being born with the wrong skin color and the audacity to believe she could heal anyone, regardless of race. Dr. Carter had not always been a doctor. She had been born Evelyn Grace Washington in 1912 in a tenant farmer's shack outside Tuskegee, Alabama. Her father, Moses, picked cotton from dawn to dusk for a white landowner who paid him barely enough to survive. Her mother, Sarah, worked as a domestic servant in town, walking 8 miles each way to clean the homes of white families who never bothered to learn her name. Evelyn was different from the moment she could walk. While other children played with corn-husk dolls and carved wooden toys, she was drawn to injured animals and sick neighbors. She would find wounded birds and nurse them back to health in makeshift boxes lined with scraps of fabric. When the old woman next door fell ill with fever, 7-year-old Evelyn sat by her bedside for 3 days, changing cool cloths on her forehead and feeding her spoonfuls of broth until the fever broke. The white doctor in town, Dr. Harrison Webb, noticed Evelyn's unusual gift during one of his rare visits to the colored section. He had come to treat a case of pneumonia and found Evelyn already there, having somehow intuited exactly what needed to be done. The child had positioned the patient to ease breathing, had prepared herbal remedies that actually helped, and had maintained detailed notes about symptoms and improvements. Dr. Webb was a complicated man, raised in the segregated South but educated at Harvard Medical School, where he had been exposed to ideas that challenged everything he thought he knew about race and intelligence. He saw something extraordinary in Evelyn, something that transcended the artificial barriers his society had constructed. Against every social convention, against the furious objections of his own family, Dr. Webb began secretly tutoring Evelyn. They would meet in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, where he taught her anatomy, physiology, and medical procedures using textbooks he smuggled from his office. Evelyn absorbed knowledge like parched earth absorbs rain, learning in months what took other students years to master. When Evelyn turned 18, Dr. Webb made an unprecedented decision. He used his connections to help her gain admission to Meharry Medical College in Nashville, one of the few medical schools in the country that accepted black students. The tuition was far beyond anything her family could afford, so Dr. Webb paid it himself, telling his wife it was charity work for the church. Medical school was a revelation and a torment for Evelyn. She excelled academically, graduating second in her class, but she faced constant discrimination from white patients during her clinical rotations. Many refused to be examined by her. Some spat in her face. Others complained to the hospital administration, demanding she be removed from their care. But Evelyn persevered, driven by a calling that burned brighter than the hatred directed at her. She understood that healing was not just her profession but her purpose, her way of proving that humanity transcended the artificial divisions society had created. After graduation, she returned to Alabama as Dr. Evelyn Grace Carter, having married a schoolteacher named James Carter who supported her dreams even when they seemed impossible. She opened a small clinic in the colored section of Birmingham, working 18-hour days treating patients who had nowhere else to turn. Her reputation as a healer spread quickly through the black community. She performed surgeries in her clinic that white doctors said were impossible. She saved children from diseases that were considered death sentences. She delivered babies safely in conditions that would have challenged surgeons at the finest hospitals. But her success made her dangerous in the eyes of Birmingham's white medical establishment. A black woman who could heal as well as any white doctor challenged the fundamental assumptions on which their segregated society was built. If she could save lives with the same skill as her white counterparts, what did that say about the supposed superiority of the white race? The threats began subtly. Patients reported that white doctors had warned them against seeking treatment from that Negro woman who thinks she's a real doctor. Medical suppliers refused to sell to her clinic. The local medical association filed complaints about her practicing without proper credentials, even though her degrees were identical to those of her white colleagues. Evelyn continued working, but the isolation was crushing. She was shunned by the white medical community and resented by some in the black community who feared her success would bring retaliation against them all. She found solace only in her work, in the moment when she could ease suffering and save lives. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon in 1943. Evelyn was in her clinic when she heard the screech of car brakes and the sound of screaming outside. A car had struck a 7-year-old white boy named Tommy Patterson as he chased a ball into the street. The child lay unconscious in the road, blood pooling beneath his head, his breathing shallow and irregular. Evelyn rushed to the scene without thinking. Training and instinct took over as she knelt beside the boy, quickly assessing his injuries. He had a severe head trauma, internal bleeding, and was going into shock. Without immediate surgery, he would die within the hour. She scooped the child into her arms and ran toward Birmingham General Hospital, 6 blocks away. The crowd that had gathered followed, some shouting encouragement, others demanding to know what the Negro doctors thought she was doing with a white child. At the hospital, Evelyn burst through the emergency room doors, the unconscious boy cradled against her chest. The white nurse at the desk looked up in shock and horror. "Get this child to surgery immediately," Evelyn commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to saving lives. "He has severe head trauma and internal bleeding. Every second counts." The nurse's face twisted with disgust and confusion. "You can't be in here," she stammered. "This is a white hospital. You need to take that boy somewhere else." "There is nowhere else," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the desperation clawing at her chest. "This child will die if we don't operate now. I'm a licensed physician. I can perform the surgery." The head nurse arrived, summoned by the commotion. Behind her came Dr. Richard Thornton, the chief of surgery, a man whose reputation was built as much on his surgical skill as on his virulent racism. "What is this Negro doing in my hospital?" Dr. Thornton demanded, his voice echoing through the emergency room. "Dr. Thornton, this child needs immediate surgery," Evelyn pleaded, still holding the dying boy. "I can save him, but we need to act now." Dr. Thornton's face flushed red with anger. "You will not touch a white child in this hospital. You will not contaminate our operating rooms with your presence. Get out immediately, or I'll have you arrested." "Then you perform the surgery," Evelyn begged, gently trying to transfer the boy to Dr. Thornton's arms. "Please, don't let him die because of your hatred for me." But Dr. Thornton stepped back, refusing to take the child. "I will not be told what to do by a Negro," he snarled. "If you're so concerned about this boy, take him to the colored hospital across town." Evelyn knew the colored hospital was 20 minutes away and lacked the equipment needed for such a complex surgery. The boy would be dead before they arrived. She stood in that hospital corridor for 17 minutes, holding a dying child, begging white doctors to save his life. The boy's parents arrived and screamed at her to put their son down, horrified that black hands were touching their child. They would rather see him die than let her heal him. Tommy Patterson died in Evelyn's arms as she stood outside Birmingham General Hospital. She had held him, whispered prayers over him, and felt his small heart stop beating against her chest. The crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence as she gently closed his eyes and laid his body on the hospital steps. The newspaper headlines the next day painted Evelyn as a villain. "Negro woman delays medical treatment, white child dies." The stories claimed she had interfered with proper medical care, that she had caused the boy's death by refusing to take him to the appropriate colored facilities. No mention was made of the fact that she was a qualified surgeon. No mention was made of the white doctors who had refused to treat a dying child. No mention was made of a medical system so corrupted by racism that it would rather let a child die than allow a black woman to save him. The boy's father, consumed by grief and rage, organized a lynch mob. They came for Evelyn 3 nights later, torches blazing, ropes ready. She heard them coming and had time to escape through the back door of her clinic, fleeing into the woods where Dr. Webb had once taught her to heal. But they burned her clinic to the ground, destroying years of work and all the medical equipment she had sacrificed to obtain. They destroyed the records of hundreds of patients she had treated successfully. They erased the evidence of her skill and dedication as if it had never existed. Evelyn fled Alabama that night, never to return. She made her way north to Detroit, where she eventually found work as a nurse in a colored hospital, her medical degree worthless because no white institution would recognize her credentials. She lived quietly for the rest of her life, never again practicing surgery, never again attempting to cross the racial barriers that had nearly cost her everything. She died in 1987, taking with her the memory of all the lives she might have saved if the color of her skin had been different. Tommy Patterson's death became a rallying cry for segregationists, proof that black medical professionals were dangerous and incompetent. But the real story, the truth of what happened that day, was buried beneath decades of lies and willful ignorance. It wasn't until 2003, when Tommy's younger sister was dying of cancer, that the full story finally emerged. In her final days, consumed by guilt that had eaten at her for 60 years, she confessed to a black nurse caring for her. "My brother didn't have to die," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "There was a colored doctor who could have saved him. But we wouldn't let her. We let him die because we hated her more than we loved him." The nurse she confessed to was Dr. Michael Carter, Evelyn's great-nephew, who had become a surgeon despite never knowing the full story of his ancestors' sacrifice. When he learned the truth, he began researching Evelyn's life, uncovering records that had been hidden or destroyed, interviewing elderly residents who remembered the real story. He discovered that Evelyn had been one of the most skilled surgeons of her generation, black or white. Her success rate in complex operations was higher than that of her white colleagues. She had developed innovative surgical techniques that weren't recognized or adopted until decades later. In 2008, Birmingham General Hospital, now integrated and renamed, held a ceremony honoring Dr. Evelyn Grace Carter. A plaque was installed in the emergency room where she had once stood holding a dying child, begging for the chance to save him. The plaque reads, "In memory of Dr. Evelyn Grace Carter, whose healing hands were turned away by hatred, and Tommy Patterson, whose life was lost to the same hatred that sought to silence her gift." But here's what haunts me about this story. It's not just that a skilled doctor was prevented from saving a child because of racism. It's that the system was so twisted, so corrupted by hate, that it preferred to let innocents die rather than acknowledge the humanity and competence of black professionals. How many Dr. Carters were there? How many brilliant minds were wasted? How many lives were lost not to disease or accident, but to the willful blindness of a society that refused to see the healing power that existed in hands deemed the wrong color? Evelyn Grace Carter carried the weight of Tommy Patterson's death for the rest of her life, blaming herself for a tragedy that was never her fault. She had been ready to save him. She had the skill, the knowledge, the dedication. The only thing she lacked was the right skin color. Today, when we walk into any hospital in America, we see doctors and nurses of every race working together to save lives. We take for granted something that Dr. Carter died believing was impossible, a world where healing transcends the artificial barriers of race. But we must remember the price that was paid for this progress. We must remember the healers who were silenced, the lives that were lost, the brilliance that was wasted in service of a lie that should never have been believed. Dr. Evelyn Grace Carter spent her life trying to heal a broken world. The tragedy is that the world broke her instead. The question we must ask ourselves is, what healing are we preventing today? What gifts are we rejecting? What lives are we failing to save because we cannot see past the surface to the heart that beats beneath? In the end, Evelyn's greatest lesson was not about medicine or surgery or even racism. It was about the fundamental truth that healing, real healing, requires us to see each other as fully human, deserving of care, worthy of salvation, regardless of the color of our skin or the circumstances of our birth. She never got to save Tommy Patterson. But maybe, if we remember her story, if we learn from her sacrifice, she can still save us all.